inviting me to speak tonight. And please let me know if I'm not projecting my voice enough. I always think I'm really loud and then people can't hear me. So please speak up if you can't hear what I'm saying. I'm Carolyn Lubbe-D'Arcy. I'm a dentist in downtown Fredericton. And I've been involved with Stop Spraying New Brunswick now for a few years. And the reason I got involved is because I really care about the natural outdoors environment, and this issue really spoke to me. And anyway, it's been an exciting ride for Stop Spraying New Brunswick, and I'll just tell you a bit about our campaign, and I can answer some questions at the end if you don't mind. Okay, so first of all, I'll give you some details about Stop Spraying New Brunswick. So we're a registered not-for-profit organization. We're incorporated. Our prime objective is to influence policy and legislation that will halt or dramatically reduce the use of glyphosate and other herbicides by industry and public bodies in New Brunswick. We also would like to see, or want to see, a policy implemented by New Brunswick government to stop public funding of Crown Forest and NB Power spraying. So I'm going to talk about three main points tonight, so I've got them laid out for you here. So the first one is that I'm going to be talking about the catastrophic drop in New Brunswick's deer population, and part of restoring that population, a big part of that would be is to stop the herbicide spraying on our forests, and I'll explain why. The second one is that New Brunswick taxpayers need to stop the annual subsidy of this practice, and not everybody is aware of the fact that we're paying for this ourselves. And then sustainable forest management will actually create more jobs and more prosperity in New Brunswick. Okay, so number one, I just want to quickly highlight as well, a lot of people don't realize this, and this is very unusual. New Brunswick is not like other places in the world when it comes to glyphosate use, because in most places in the world and in Canada, the predominant use of glyphosate in a province is actually agricultural spraying. In New Brunswick, it's 61% of glyphosate use is on forests, and then 27% is by industry, which would be NB Power and other industry type things, and 11% is agricultural use. So it's a very small percentage of the total use, and that's why we don't address it. We're not targeting farmers. We're really after the forestry problem. And we also have the most intense forest spraying in Canada. So we have some infographics that help us highlight our main points. And this is a big deal. If you think of how small New Brunswick is, and a third of all the forest herbicides, which is glyphosate, lands on our forests, that is a lot. That's something to definitely not be happy about. So I also want to explain quickly, sorry, I'm just trying to make my notes fit with my slides. So I just want to make it very clear that we're not anti-forestry or anti-logging. We realize that forests in New Brunswick are a very good resource for our province that we can actually make money off. But we need to do it in a way so that we can keep doing it, instead of just making the resource, taking it away so quickly that there's nothing left. So we're not against cutting trees, because we need trees to do things. It's not about that. It's just the unsustainable way that we're doing it in New Brunswick that we have a problem with. Okay. All right, so on we go. So here you can see how much land in New Brunswick is sprayed on our forest, on our crown forest. And again, we are about public forest spraying, so we're not targeting private land spraying. And actually, it is a pretty small percentage. The big amount of herbicide spraying is happening on our crown land. So that's about 13,000 to 16,000 hectares every year that's being sprayed with herbicides. NB Power sprays about 4,000 hectares every year. We know that CN Rail is planning to spray this year. We don't know how much, but it's basically most of their rail lines are on the list. And again, we have an infographic that highlights the communities that are being hit by this. And there's quite a few New Brunswick communities that are on there. And also, actually, the base Gagetown sprays a ton as well. Last year they sprayed 25,000 hectares. This year it's 24,000 hectares. And I was actually even surprised to hear that, because I didn't realize that they would do it again this year. So that is a lot of spraying. It's a federal program, of course, but our provincial government still okays it because it's in the province. Okay, so the primary reason why these herbicides are being sprayed on our crown forests, and I'm sure that a lot of you know this anyway, is to maximize profits for the large forestry companies. It's basically allowing them to do a very lazy type of forestry, and on top of that, the large companies are after a very low quality product, right? Our forests are being turned into toilet paper pretty much, or they're being sent out in chips, in wagons, you know, being exported. So we're not doing value added type manufacturing on the wood products that we have, or the wood that we have here. They're turned into products somewhere else, except for, of course, we're making toilet paper here. But there are much better products that we could create with the wood that we have. So why is spraying done in New Brunswick? The herbicides are applied to prevent competition, of course. When the softwood plantations are growing, they're applied to prevent hardwood trees from interfering with the softwood trees. And usually what it means is that after a clear cut has happened, then it might sit around for a year or two, and of course stuff starts growing back. So there's always a pre-spray that has to happen before a plantation is planted. So you've got a pre-spray that happens, and then a spray usually a few years later when the seedlings are up and the hardwood is again trying to come up to try to outcompete the softwood. They have to do it again. The hardwood does try to come back after spraying. It doesn't come back in a healthy way. I do want to highlight that, and I've seen videos from even BC where a group is also fighting this issue, where they've shown with videos that 4 years later hardwoods are growing back, but they're not looking like normal healthy hardwoods. But they still get in the way of these softwood trees, so they have to spray them again. And we have had many eyewitness accounts of people that live near these areas that say that they've seen three times spraying happening. So it's definitely not just once. And that's what the government tries to tell us, that it's, oh, we're just doing it once. And that's from what we have seen, because of course we don't really get to hear a lot. Although we did a Freedom of Information from 2013 to 2016 on spray activity, and we actually could see then that there were one-time sprayed, you know, that some PID numbers were sprayed more than once and sometimes even 3 times. So we do have that evidence in that Freedom of Information. So the companies that are benefiting from this herbicide spraying are focused on the softwood plantations, as I said before. So I'll go back to my main points now. I just wanted to give a little bit of background why this herbicide is being used. And of course it is glyphosate, which you probably all know is the same thing as what's in Roundup. So that's why, you know, you hear a lot of talk about Monsanto, because Monsanto, of course, is the company that came up with this agent. And another thing to remember is that glyphosate is never sprayed in pure form. So it comes in different brand names because of the, you know, it's like when you buy medication, right? It's never a pure drug. There's always other stuff in it, and then there's a brand name attached to it. So you've got, you know, you've got Vision Max, you've got Forza, you've got all kinds of different brand names, but it's the same active ingredient. But the problem is that the things that it's mixed up with actually have an effect as well, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, so New Brunswick has this problem. We're losing our deer population. In 1985, we had about 270,000 deer. Now we're down to 70,000. So we're at about, you know, a small percentage of what it used to be. And this is really the reason that Stop Spraying New Brunswick exploded. Because it was the news of the crash of the deer herd that got the rural population up in arms. I mean, people have been noticing it for years, I was told. Like, I live in the city, so of course, I can't speak for myself, but I have heard that people have been talking for years about seeing that they just don't see the wildlife that they used to see, and that the deer are just nowhere to be seen in a lot of parts of the forest. So when the news came out, that's when the petition was launched, and that's when, you know, the ball got rolling about 2.5 years ago. And you probably all know that we did a handwritten petition. We've tabled 35,000 petitions at the legislature, so it is a big issue for a lot of New Brunswickers. So the problem with the deer, it affecting the deer, is that you've probably heard of Rod Cumberland. He's the retired deer biologist of New Brunswick. He discovered himself, when he worked with Department of Natural Resources in his job, that what he was seeing was that deer were just not seen, especially in the north, you know, where the plantations were. There were no deer living on Crown land. He would see them on private woodlots where people are doing more selective cutting or natural regeneration. So he was putting 2 and 2 together. So he tried to convince the Department of Natural Resources that he was seeing this pretty clear, you know, correlation between the deer where they are and the activity on the forest land. And of course, the government didn't listen, and he left the NR, and he's now doing a different job. But you know, he discovered that, you know, he said to himself, like, when you're spraying a clear cut, you're killing the stuff that deer like to eat. You know, all the things that deer like are new twigs, they're berry bushes, there's a whole bunch of different hardwood things that deer like to eat, but they don't get a chance to grow when you do the spraying. So, you know, his logic is that if you kill the food, the animals disappear. It kind of makes sense, right? So, I mean, that's part of the reason probably why a lot of people are not complaining about in urban places, you know, in communities, that the deer are showing up in people's backyards, they're on the farms eating, because they need to eat somewhere. So part of the issue for the deer is the loss of their food, and also, of course, loss of habitat. There's no shelter. You know, they're losing their shelter because the prime places where they like to hang out in the winter are being cut down. So they just are losing their homes.
They headed down to St. Andrews.
Yes, exactly, and also in Brunswick, you know.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so I guess I'll just show you another slide. This is based on government data as well. This is the sort of the hunting results, so that the harvests that we've seen for deer in New Brunswick. And you can see that the harvest used to be really high in '85 in New Brunswick, and they're down to maybe like, what, 15% of what it used to be. In Maine, it stayed equal. In Quebec, what happened was they stopped spraying herbicides on forests in 2001. So look at what's happened there, you know, relative to what they had before. There's a big difference. So, you know, we have enough evidence to show that there is something going on. You know, and the government likes to say, oh, we've got bad winters. Well, you know, as far as I know, Quebec has pretty horrible winters. And Maine is pretty much the same as us, right? They're on the same latitude and everything else. So that's really kind of a silly thing to say. Okay, so here's just some pictures that I'd like to show you where this is kind of a softwood plantation where you see, it's maybe a little hard to see because it's light here, not so dark in here, but there is some hardwood trying to come back, but it's really not looking good. And then what happened was that a person who owns a woodlot, who doesn't do this kind of thing, cut some things from some of that stuff that was trying to grow back, and I was at a meeting where I could actually feel the leaves, and the leaves were all like kind of curled, you know, as if they, and these are plants that are growing back, so they haven't been sprayed, but the leaves just don't look healthy. And what he was saying is that he's seen moose on these plantations that are eating that stuff. So then you have to wonder, because we know now that glyphosate does get bound into the soil and it enters plants. So then you wonder, are these animals eating stuff that's contaminated? You know, it's not the people that are eating that stuff, but the animals are, and people hunt them, and should people worry about what they're eating, you know, that they've harvested? And there are no studies, so New Brunswick government is refusing to study this. We don't know if we should worry about it, but you wonder, right? And people do certainly tell us that they see, you know, weird-looking fatty liver things on moose. And one of the things that studies have shown is that when the few studies that have been done on long-term low-dose exposure have shown that fatty liver disease is something that happens to lab rats. So again, we can't make that claim that that's what it is, but we need to have it studied, you know, and that's the problem that we're seeing, is that our government is just absolving itself of all responsibility to study our wildlife, to figure out what the heck is going on here. They're only pointing to Health Canada, which is a federal department. Health Canada has said glyphosate's fine. But of course, Health Canada is only looking at agriculture because glyphosate is used mainly for agriculture. And I'm not saying it's fine for agriculture, but they're looking at studies that have nothing to do with forestry in the first place. And of course, we know now, for anybody who's been following some of the Monsanto legal lawsuits and stuff, that even with the food, you know, there's issues with the studies that have been either hidden or, you know, suppressed. So there's so many questions coming up about glyphosate safety that really, you know, we need to look at it again and study it in a different way, you know, in a way where we look at long-term exposure rather than these short studies that they always did, because they used to just worry about toxicity. They were worried about dose levels, not so much that it was going to do anything to your biological system. But now they know that it's actually affecting, you know, bacteria, soil bacteria and stuff like that. possibly bacteria in our gut. So there's a whole other thing that they're finding out about glyphosate that really needs to be looked at in more detail. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next slide. So my next point was about the fact that we're subsidizing this whole program. So last year, through a Freedom of Information, we found out that New Brunswick taxpayers paid $2.86 million for forest spraying in 2017. Now, a big chunk of that was just on public land spraying. I just want to show you the difference. So if you look here, this is Crown land, and then down here is private land. So there is some subsidy for private land spraying, but if you compare it to what Crown land spraying is, 5 times as much is being spent on Crown land silviculture spraying as opposed to private land. So again, we're not attacking private landowners right now because we feel that we can't really tell a private person what to do, but we can tell government on our public land we don't like this. Also the cost has gone up over the years, and that makes sense because of course since 2014 with the new forestry deal, more clear cutting on Crown land has been allowed, more plantations are being started, so we're going to see an escalating amount of this happening every year. I'm sure that if we go through a Freedom of Information after this spray season, we will see that we spend more money again. So these companies are, that's really the irony of it all, right? Because this is our public land that we are allowing these companies to chop down, and then they are growing plantations for their own benefit. This is not plantations for our benefit. We don't see 1 ounce of their, or 1 cent of their profits. They're getting paid, so they're getting our help to get their plantations going, but we get nothing in return. So this is definitely another form of corporate, welfare, no question. And it just boggles my mind that this is even, they call it forestry management. This is not forest management. This is forest destruction and plantation management. It's got nothing to do with keeping our forests managed. And anyways, it's just crazy.
And make the taxpayer pay for it.
Pardon me?
And make the taxpayer pay for it.
Yeah, and we're paying for it. So I mean, this is a big deal, and we found when we've been doing these infographics and we've been able to kind of see what people are really angry about, and certainly this subsidy is the thing that I've seen the biggest response to. Is like, we are paying for this. So I just want to show you some hotspots. We were able to create some maps that show spraying hotspots in New Brunswick. So this was for 2013 to 2016. The darker orange dots are Crown land, and the less sort of pale orange right here are on freehold. So that's owned by industry. Over here we have the hotspots from last year. So you can kind of see, it kind of switches around a little bit. And we certainly have noticed with the supporters that we have that in the hotspots we've got a lot of signs up. This area is just, tons of people have signs up in here, and in the north over there, like Kedgwick area, people are very mobilized against this. And then in the Sussex area, at Petticodiac, there's a huge, section of the population that's very upset about what's going on with the forests. Okay, so now we're going to go on my third point. So, sustainable practices actually create more jobs. So, actually I'll just go back to that first. So what's happening is that the spray program creates very few jobs. So of course the government says, well, it's always the jobs, right, that we're told about, that's why we should stay quiet. But the thing is, calculations have been done, and we've consulted with people that actually have companies that do the work. So we were told that if the spray program was replaced by manual cutting, it would create 1,000 direct jobs. So that's 1,000 people that would have work, that then would be contributing to the economy, not on unemployment, not on welfare. So our government keeps telling us that, well, it's more expensive to hire people to do the work, but they're not calculating what the people who don't work cost the government. So again, it's just a really, short-sighted explanation, but it's so easy, right? Like, oh yeah, well, whatever. So we're trying to explain that no, you could hire 1,000 people, they could work through the season. I know because through being on this group, so people that are manual, they do that work for a living, they have a very difficult time being employed, enough weeks in the summer to get enough of this done. So a lot of people are sitting at home not doing the work. And it would just be such an easy way to give 1,000 immediate jobs to people when we constantly get these other kinds of job promises where the government is giving money to some call center or whatever, and then suddenly it disappears. So this is actually, this would be real jobs. And this is just if nothing else changed, right? If they didn't change their forestry practices, if they just did away with the spray program, we would have 1,000 extra jobs. So I don't want to go in too much into the health impact. The health impact is definitely a concern, of course. But when it comes to forest spraying, we're not standing in the forest and all being sprayed directly. So there is a difference between ingesting glyphosates that have been sprayed on farm food that you are just eating, as opposed to forest being sprayed and then getting the exposure. So it's a bit of a different exposure, and that's why it should be studied, we think. And of course the animals are getting sprayed, because I can't imagine that the animals can read the signs that say we're going to spray and they all cleared out the forest. So we know that the critters in the forest are getting exposed to this. There's no question. But I did want to highlight, I mentioned it earlier a little bit, that people constantly say, well, glyphosate causes cancer, but there's a whole other area of health risk actually that are starting to become associated with glyphosate because of some studies that have been done. It needs to be studied more, but some of the studies that have come out, and there was actually one suppressed study that came out during a lawsuit with the Monsanto case, where someone had done a long-term study on lab rats, and he found like fatty liver disease, endocrine issues, and there's a few other studies. But yeah, there aren't enough studies yet because they just haven't been done, right? Like, we need to start over and recognizing that something that we thought was okay 20 years ago is maybe not so okay anymore. And the thing is, I'm a health professional, and I know what happens in my field, right? Like, or when medication comes out that seems to be the latest miracle drug, and then suddenly 10 years later, it's like, oh, it causes all these other things. And that's what's happening with this. So our government should just be, I don't understand why you can't just say, okay, we were wrong. New research has come out. We should exercise the precautionary principle, and we should stop using this until we know it's safe again. So that's what we're arguing. We're not saying for sure it does all this. We're just saying, can you please exercise the precautionary principle? Stop using it, because you really, at this point, can't say for sure that it's safe. Okay, so I'll quickly just give you a few examples of, and you all know this probably, but I just will give a few things that I found in a really good book about forestry by actually a homegrown forester who's now actually an environmental lawyer, Jamie Simpson. He wrote a really great book about the Acadian forest. And I'll just read a few little things to you. So, calculations by people who work in silviculture show that spraying, never mind. In 1996, the Carlton Victoria Wood Marketing Board did a study and found that partial cutting creates more wood for products than clear cutting. And I think we all kind of know that, that if we manage our forest by just doing selective cutting, we actually get more out of the forest than just chopping it down and then letting it grow back. Between 1946 and 1989, the Maritime College of Forest Technology in Fredericton carried out a 43-year study that demonstrated that partial cutting creates more wood than clear cutting. So it's not even the same amount of wood, it's more wood. And then I'll give you one more. The Forest Engineering Research Institute of Canada studied the costs of mechanical versus manual harvesting, and mechanizing forestry, of course, creates less jobs. And that's part of the problem that we're having right now with the forestry paradigm that we're using. It's high mechanization and also low quality products. So we're not using our wood to make things that are worth more. And especially the Acadian forest, has really high quality trees. So we could be using these trees, for hardwood flooring, for cabinets. And the funny thing is, we just went through kind of a big renovation at my office, a bit of a retrofit, and we were trying to source our wood as much locally as we could. And it's very difficult to get hardwood flooring that's actually from New Brunswick. We ended up going for hemlock flooring from a Kingsclear mill, and it's gorgeous. It's softer wood, right? But we love it. But the thing is, you know, we really had to kind of work hard to get local stuff, and then most of it we had to get from somewhere else, which is really unfortunate because, you know, we're the province with forests, you know, it just seems so ridiculous. Okay, so anyway, I'm pretty much finished here. I just want to quickly give you the summary that, so the catastrophic drop in the New Brunswick deer population is a big point, the fact that we're subsidizing it, and the fact that sustainable forest management will actually give us more work and better revenue. I'm just going to leave up a slide that if you want to help out with our issue, I know you're here, you know, for a political party town hall, but if you're interested in helping spread the word about this issue, we have lawn signs. Pretty soon we're going to be, I'm just getting them printed up, we're going to have little sign poppers that are going to be, people can be putting on their signs that say hashtag vote to stop spraying 2018. So what we're going to do is we're lucky enough to have a ton of volunteers all over New Brunswick. And that's really what's so exciting about this movement, I find. That people just came from all over the place, people that I've never met before, that contacted me via Facebook and said, can you please, I want to become a helper, what can I do? So I've got sign depots all over the province, and we have ways of getting signs to these people because there's always a volunteer that's willing to drive signs somewhere. So we're going to get these little sign toppers to our sign depots so that they can then distribute these little sign toppers to people who already have a lawn sign. Because we didn't want to start duplicating signs again. People already have a sign. So, but anyway, so we're really going to ramp up our sign campaign. I have some signs here if anybody wants to buy some. I've got a whole fresh order coming in on Wednesday. And we have bumper stickers as well. I'm totally out right now. I went to the printer before I came here, but they weren't finished yet. But just let me know if you want bumper stickers. They're really nice. They're like those yellow ones. They're triangular. You may have seen them on people's cars. And we also have buttons. We have 3 different kinds of buttons that we made. One says vote to end spraying 2018. One just says stop spraying New Brunswick. And then we have also we won't pay to spray buttons. So I'm going to be having more of these made. I think I'm just going to stick with the election ones. So we're going to have buttons as well for people to carry, like especially students, because you know we really think, just like you realize with your political party, it is good to show your colors. And this is not a political party color, but it's a big issue. And we just found out today when CBC released their voting compass, where you can see which party fits you. And our issue is in the questions. So we're quite excited that it is a prominent election issue, and we already kind of knew that. And also I left some contact information up. My email address, carolyn@stopsprayingnb.ca. You can go to Facebook, Stop Spraying New Brunswick. We have a website, we have a Twitter account, and we also have an Instagram account. Anyway, that's it.